In 1991, Warner Brothers released an Oliver Stone film that challenged the entire government narrative of the Kennedy assassination. JFK was not only a blockbuster success, nominated for Best Picture, it prompted congressional legislation promising to release all government files on the case by 2017. The film presented a conspiracy theory of CIA and Pentagon elements colluding to foment a coup d'etat against the presidency on behalf of the military-industrial complex.
What happened was that after JFK, they opened an office in Hollywood. The Pentagon always had this Hollywood relationship going back for years, but CIA never quite this way. So they opened an office in '96. They sent out a guy called Chase Brandon. He mentored and he got involved with Sum of All Fears, Argo, Zero Dark 30, the Alias series, MI3. Charlie Wilson's War is more of a Pentagon deal, but there it was complete distortion. Tom Hanks is a hero. Charlie Wilson was an idiot, a moron who went to Afghanistan and caused a lot of damage. Bill Casey was running his own war in Afghanistan. It's a very complicated story, but the analysis of Charlie Wilson's war is that, you know, we have to go to war for Afghanistan because it's the Soviets are going to destroy Afghanistan and threaten our way of life.
Zero Dark 30 is also an egregious example of propaganda. One of the premises of Zero Dark 30 is that torture is not only efficacious but beneficial in the war against quote-unquote terror.
I'm not your friend. I'm not going to help you. I'm going to break you. Any questions?
Waterboarding has been a U.S. instrument of interrogation dating back to its wars in Vietnam and even the Philippines. The CIA even created its Kubark intelligence manual in 1963 to teach torture methods. Thus, it should come as little surprise to see the CIA torturing captured suspects in a film written with CIA approval about the hunt for bin Laden.
There was a book that was recently published by John Rizzo, who was a counsel for the CIA. It was called Company Man. And although he lauded the CIA and all the good works that the CIA did, he did mention somewhat innocuously that there were Hollywood assets sprinkled throughout Los Angeles.
Carl Bernstein had a seminal article in the Rolling Stone magazine in 1977, the Watergate muckraker, that when he covered the U.S. Senate Church Committee and their findings on U.S. intelligence and the CIA, he found that well over 400 members of the media lived dual lives in their work for the CIA. And these were not just regular journalists, but the owners of all the major media. He listed them, the owners of CBS, ABC, NBC, etc., Time Incorporated. Different ways they did it was basically owning, getting ownership over most of the media.
I've been a journalist for about 25 years, and I was educated to lie, to betray, and not to tell the truth to the public. Now, you ask, what have I done for intelligence agencies? So, please see, most of the journalists you see in foreign countries, they claim to be journalists, and they might be journalists, but many of them, like me in the past, are so-called non-official cover. It means you too work for an intelligence agency. You help them if they want you to help them, but when they find out that you're not only a journalist, but a spy too, they will never say, oh, this was one of our guys. They will not know you. That means non-official cover. So I have helped them in several situations, and I feel ashamed for that too now. Like I feel ashamed that I have worked for a very recommended newspaper like the Frankfurter Allgemeine, because I was bribed by billionaires, I was bribed by the Americans not to report exactly the truth. I just tried to work out in my brain what would have happened if I would have written a pro-Russian article in the Frankfurter Allgemeine. Well, I don't know what would have happened, but we were all educated to write pro-European, pro-American, but please, not pro-Russian.
Frank Wisner was the head of Operation Mockingbird, and one of his famous quotes is, "You could buy a journalist cheaper than you could buy a good call girl."
While Frank Wisner ran Project Mockingbird for the CIA, he was strongly supported by Katharine Graham's husband, Philip, then the head of the Washington Post. The CIA also colluded with ABC, NBC, Reuters, the New York Times, William Paley of CBS, a former psychological warfare specialist during World War II, and Time Life, whose managing director, C.D. Jackson, had also been a psychological warfare specialist.
Buying up Hollywood is a bipartisan effort. And early on, I mean, one of the things that funded the Clinton Foundation, for example, Frank Giusti, who seized control of Lionsgate, his goal is not movies and propaganda. His goal was ownership of a president and possibly a future one, Clinton and the Mrs. Clinton. And so, for example, I was in Kazakhstan, and Clinton had shown up there with Giusti of Lionsgate, and now Clinton says there's no connection. His wife had gotten the dictator of Kazakhstan removed from a federal indictment for bribery as Secretary of State. Then Bill Clinton shows up with Giusti, says kind words about this bloodthirsty dictator, Nazarbayev, and then Giusti, who's literally Clinton's ride into Kazakhstan, has a private meeting with Nazarbayev and comes out with the exclusive contract to mine Kazakhstan's uranium. Now, maybe there's no connection, but Giusti then is in such a good mood that he gives over $30 million to the Clinton Foundation.
While the Clintons may have embedded themselves with Frank Giustra of Lionsgate, President Trump's Secretary of Treasury, Steve Mnuchin, co-founded Rat Pack in 2004, with director Brett Ratner financing dozens of blockbuster films like the X-Men series and Avatar.
For example, one of his first films that he funded when he walked in was American Sniper, which was, basically glorifying, the kind of killer SEAL Team 6 hit squads, military glorification. It's a long way from platoon to sniper. So that was the Mnuchin shift, and now he's our Secretary of Treasury.
American Sniper is really an egregious case of propaganda. It's set in the second siege of Fallujah, which was a bloodbath. I mean, the Americans, we cut off the electricity, the water to the Iraqis, and scores of innocent civilians were killed.
Increasingly so as the American media becomes a corporate mouthpiece for the government's point of view. There's a natural conflict, and that's what I'm interested in. I guess conflict. If I agreed with the government point of view, why would I make movies like that? We have directors who are quite willing to do that because they can get the cooperation, certainly big money from the Pentagon, like Ridley Scott admits to that. And Black Hawk Down's fun to watch. It's a great, technically a brilliant film. He's a brilliant filmmaker. But it's a horrible film in the same sense that Lone Survivor is. It's just every American who goes down is a perfect hero. I've never seen people, I mean, I've been in combat. I've seen people get scared, They know they're going down in the helicopter and they're still talking to the commander and in official technology terms and saying, mission complete or this or that or something noble or sentimental, but it doesn't work that way. People are scared. Most people, before they die, in some kind of way, the last thought in their head is, oh, shit.
Black Hawk Down was originally quite a kind of neutral and very successful book by Mark Bowden, and I get the impression that he very much was okay with the military heavily rewriting that and the producers heavily reworking his material. There was actually some quite critical material in that original book, Black Hawk Down, but it was all excised. And the original script, of course, had more, even the script, after it had been watered down by directors and producers, had more salacious and violent material in it, which would have called into question the Americans' role in Somalia in 1993.
Where our troops are now all over Africa. We're starting in Africa now. We have bases in how many countries in the world? 130. We have some kind of military mission. We have 900, or we don't know how many bases. We think we have 700 to 900 bases abroad, as well as 6,000 in the U.S. It's quite a military machine we have. We have two countries. We have the Pentagon and we have the U.S. Which country am I in?
I remember that one great British newsman had said when seeing film from Vietnam, which was at that time uncensored, people could go, all over Vietnam, shooting film, and you could see, like a child running down the street on fire from napalm. These are the images that Americans were beginning to see about Vietnam. And Alistair Cooke said, that's the end of war, because once people with television and cameras now in the field, no one's ever going to support a war when they see the horror show that it creates, the misery and the horror and the terror and the murder of civilians and children that are just an automatic adjunct of war. War is over.
After the First World War, the British established the Tavistock Clinic to study shell shock and other psychological conditions experienced by returning veterans, leading to much work and theory in the field of social and group control.
The Tavistock Institute, for example, which dealt with a lot of social engineering projects and post-World War I and World War II PSYOP, they actually studied Hitchcock films to figure out how people could be shocked in a certain way or traumatized. So in a way, trauma research and its connection to movies like Psycho, which was revolutionary for its time, that was actually studied in a scientific way. And so in that sense, mass traumatization through degradation in film or something like that we see with a lot of these really disgusting modern horror films, this kind of stuff, that was actually studied in such a fashion that it could be used to socially engineer. There's a propaganda level. There's also the traumatization level, which I think happens at a lower, deeper subconscious level through the degradation that we see in a lot of these movies, the really dark stuff at times. And what that does is basically puts people into a catatonic state, and that's done on purpose, as I said, with the studies that were done into Hitchcock films, because when you're in a kind of jilted catatonic state, you're actually much more suggestible.
The feeling of freedom. Everyone in the world should experience freedom, and you get it on the open road. The world according to Jesse. Welcome to my world. Come along for the ride.
If you want to see all the great behind-the-scenes craziness that goes on here, follow RT America on Instagram.
Hi guys, join me, Vanilla Chan, and the rest of my RT family right here on Instagram.
At the end of the Second World War, a number of psychological warfare specialists shifted into a new field of study called communication research, with the government subsidizing much of the work being done at universities like Princeton, Columbia, and MIT. Meanwhile, the CIA sponsored the Congress for Cultural Freedom, with artists like Leonard Bernstein, George Orwell, and Jackson Pollock as symbols of Western culture and liberal expression, while artists like Paul Robeson, the black singer and actor who advocated for civil rights and peace with the Soviets, were hounded.
At that time, they were targeting great activist entertainers such as Paul Robeson, who was an amazing musician, considered one of the best singers in the world, and also an actor. And so you find that they seriously targeted Paul Robeson, dosing him with acid, for example, according to his son, Paul Robeson Jr., in a hotel in Moscow about a few weeks before he was going to meet with Che Guevara and Fidel Castro. The CIA had started a group called the Congress of Cultural Freedom, and that group was huge, gave out vast amounts of money that, in effect, in studying all the CIA documents and U.S. intelligence documents, they became America's secret Ministry of Culture.
In Hollywood, the CIA had assets like Luigi Laraschi working at major studios like Paramount, as well as MGM and RKO, to, in the words of psychological warfare expert C.D. Jackson, insert in their scripts and in their actions the right ideas with the proper subtlety.
There was an Air Force studio in Los Angeles called Lookout Mountain Movie Studios, film studios, owned by the Air Force. And they got all the major producers and actors of the time, of the 40s and 50s. We're talking about Walt Disney and John Ford and Marilyn Monroe and a number of major actors to sign confidentiality agreements that were akin to having top secret clearance in the military about the films that they made in Lookout Mountain Studio. And they made over 19,000 films in that studio.
This was a private Air Force studio that only the Air Force had access to, and they filmed some 20,000 different films, most of which we've not actually seen. There are actually archived footage, though, that I've found and put in different videos that I've made that show what they were doing. And what they were doing was actually selling a lot of propaganda through using big Hollywood stars at that time. For example, Jimmy Stewart's actually in some of the Laurel Canyon film footage.
The Air Force's Lookout Mountain studio, atop Laurel Canyon, was officially shut down in 1968.
There are some connections, for example, that Dave McGowan has made in his book, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, where he points out that a lot of the Hollywood scene, a lot of the music scene, especially the precursor to the hippie revolution, which he titles the Laurel Canyon scene, most of those families, Jim Morrison's dad was actually an admiral. He was involved in the Gulf of Tonkin false flag incident. Frank Zappa's family actually worked at a biowarfare lab.
Frank Zappa grew up at the Edgewood Arsenal, where his father was one of many human guinea pigs for chemical weapons research. But the military wasn't the only government group experimenting on humans, as the CIA's post-war MKUltra program worked to control the human mind with experimental techniques and drugs like LSD.
When you look at the guys who studied MKUltra and who founded it and got it going, people like Gordon Wasson, they actually went and they studied indigenous groups, indigenous cultures in South America, Latin America, to find out how the shamans ran their tribes. So you could look at the CIA MKUltra guys as kind of like shamans. That was their goal. That was their purpose in promoting LSD and promoting this kind of stuff through the counterculture, through the stuff that, we talked about with the Doors and Mamas and the Papas and the Beatles, the drug revolution and all that. That was largely a CIA promoted social engineering tool. So that's the real kicker here, is that it's about manipulating culture. It's not so much about creating an individual assassin. I mean, that kind of stuff does happen, the Jason Bourne type stuff. But really, the big plan is to use culture to socially engineer.
I found that with musicians, there was a common theme, and what the common theme was is they got a lot of agents involved in these people's lives and influenced them to start using drugs, promoting drugs inadvertently without them realizing, that why they were doing it. But then when they started sobering up, they were done away with. There was, tons of ways that they were trained in COINTELPRO tactics. And COINTELPRO is the FBI's counterintelligence program that had murderously targeted the Black Panthers and other black activists, as well as white activists. A U.S. Congressional Committee had said that in 1993 that we have to start focusing on political rappers, and it's a concern, a serious concern, that political rappers are influencing black youth to become more political. When I investigated the case of the rap artist Tupac Shakur, the FBI, I filed a Freedom of Information Act, and the FBI basically admitted to me, they said that there's over 4,000 pages in Tupac's FBI file, and I had to pay for all those pages, and then they only sent me 99 pages that were themselves redacted.
While Tupac may have appeared to be a threat because of his mainstream influence and Black Panther heritage, the targeting of political parties and opposition voices domestically has occurred illegally for years as part of the FBI's COINTEL program. And more recently, the National Security Agency has worked with the British government's communication headquarters to, quote, inject all sorts of false material onto the internet in order to destroy the reputation of its targets, and to use social sciences and other techniques to manipulate online discourse and activism to generate outcomes it considers desirable. One filmmaker who challenged the government's social engineering to control and alter human behavior was Stanley Kubrick.
What he did, I think, in the long run was throughout his movies, he showed a consistent pattern of showing MK Ultra is something very real. You see this in Clockwork Orange, where the Alex character is strapped down and he's given a bunch of drugs. This is actually detailed in the MK Ultra Dr. Ewan Cameron's work. It's detailed in the book by Dr. John C. Lilly, who's actually one of the MK Ultra doctors, how he would strap people down and give them LSD and wipe their brains, reprogram them. So what you're seeing in Kubrick films is, generally speaking, real. There is a propaganda aspect, as we said, with 2001. But when we look at Clockwork Orange, when we look at Eyes Wide Shut, these are films that I think are showing real aspects of conspiracy and how it relates to Hollywood and the government.
The Tavistock Institute's Eric Trist and Fred Emery predicted in their book A Choice of Futures, a Clockwork Orange reality where youths commit random acts of violence, then go home and watch it on TV, as mass media and television put them into increasingly dissociated states. Perhaps we have entered that dissociated state, with wars and rumors of wars echoing daily, while superheroes save the world nightly on our mobile screens.
We have been attacked. We are at war.
In 2017, Luminary director Rob Reiner created the Committee to Investigate Russia with former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper, who lied to Congress about NSA domestic surveillance, and David Frum, renowned for coining the axis of evil phrase as President George W. Bush's speechwriter. Reiner chose Morgan Freeman, known for playing the voice of God, to deliver the message.
I mean, you have guys like Rob Reiner, who is associated with the ultimate of the cabal of liberal Jewish thinkers in Hollywood, and suddenly they're talking about Russia, Russia, Russia. Russia's now seized control of the new media.
Now the fashion is, you got to hate the Russians. The Russians subverted the election, trying to destroy American values and so forth. But we heard this before in the 1950s.
From this day forward, you will become sparrows. Weapons in a global struggle for power.
You belong to them. They'll never let you go.
The most simple aspect of propaganda is just to try to kind of sell and build the brand. For example, it was recently obtained through FOIA request the influence of the Pentagon and the FBI in different shows, and this included things like Cupcake Wars. The Pentagon was involved in directly funding pro-military aspects and phrases, propositions to be added to the script for something innocuous like Cupcake Wars. And that's because, again, they're interested in culture creation and managing and steering the culture. So that's why they have to control the musicians. That's why they have to control the A-list stars, and so forth and so on. So yes, absolutely, we can see a direct parallel between movies like Zero Dark 30, which, again, totally promotes the CIA mythology of bin Laden. We can look at American Sniper, which you mentioned, which is, promoting this mythology of Chris Kyle to basically be recruitment films. That's what these are in their most simple aspect. And we know, in fact, that the CIA consults on shows like Homeland. That's public knowledge, public news.
Since the birth of Freudian psychology, the major techniques used by media to sell its product have been insecurity and sex.
By the standards of America, Hollywood is liberal. We live extravagantly. Obviously, our sex lives, as we can be seen from the recent news, are above normal, extraordinary, you would say. We spend liberally on things that seem crazy to people, to spend $1 million doing scenes in a movie, you know. Plus, it's got an aura of fun and sin.
But one of the darker sides of Freudian psychology's elaboration on childhood sexuality is not only the increasing sexualization of teens and preteens by media, but the overt pedophilia that has been exposed in recent years from Washington to Hollywood. With former Speaker of the House Dennis Hastert being sentenced, and Hollywood celebrities like Kevin Spacey and director Bryan Singer accused.
Has anyone asked Bryan Singer, do you have settlements with anybody? Ask Marty Singer, Bryan Singer's attorney. Did Bryan Singer settle with anyone? You know, no one's asked and no one wants to ask. That's the thing. Nobody in Hollywood wants to ask the tough questions because it's going to cost them a lot of money. We're talking about the X-Men franchise.
Today we have things starting to break with the Bryan Singer allegations and the Corey Feldman allegations. And I think that Hollywood would definitely be ripe for blackmail.
Convicted pedophile Jeffrey Epstein, the billionaire friend to stars like Kevin Spacey and Chris Tucker, as well as statesmen like Bill Clinton and Prince Andrew, may indicate deeper layers to Hollywood and Washington's pedophilia that have yet to be explored.
The thing about Epstein that really hasn't come out, it's come out a little bit that he's pandered these children to the rich and the powerful, but there's been a lot of innuendo of blackmail that Epstein deployed. And actually, when the Palm Beach Police Department searched his home, there were hidden cameras in Epstein's home. Kevin Spacey and Harvey Weinstein's names are in Epstein's Black Book.
I'm not talking some weird conspiracy. I'm just talking that these people all work in circles together and they're highly organized, and people need to wake up and realize that. This isn't just a few random instances of some lone pedophile. These guys all run in the same circles, and they need to be exposed, and some of them are very powerful and very wealthy.
While Hollywood has the power to tell stories that reflect our dreams and realities, there is both a dark and light potential to such magic. The government and ruling elite desiring to influence and shape those stories should come as no surprise. But we, the captive audience, must recognize that there are deeper agendas at work. For as Raquel Lindsay predicted over 100 years ago, the art of the moving picture can replace religion with its mystical images and rousing music, wherein prophets may conjure a higher form of vision seeing.